You cannot leave this stuff forever above ground in deep swimming pools where it is at reactors now, or in the concrete and steel dry casks where it is at reactors right now. Eventually, those mechanisms of storage will fail, and that material will get right into the environment.
Thank you for joining us today. What you're about to see is a meeting of the Petition Review Board of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. This meeting was called by public watchdogs whose petition to the PRB had been rejected out of hand without review on its merits. We had called this meeting as one of the few ways the public can intervene with the NRC, ostensibly to present new information for them to consider in their rejection. What we did, however, was far more than that. We gave them a lot of information about how they are perceived by the public and how we feel, and many people feel, that they overstep their regulatory prerogative in denying the public adequate voice and always favoring the nuclear industry itself. Thank you very much for watching.
Just 2 weeks ago, a document was submitted by Holtec that said we want to get rid of emergency planning because an accident is not credible. I don't want to use the word I'm thinking of. What the blank does that mean? Non-credible. Here we have a 50.90 application from Holtec on Oyster Creek that says, hey guys, we want to change our offsite emergency planning because there's no credible event. What does that mean?
Next. Change it or delete their planning. They want to, I thought
they want to delete it. Yeah.
They want to avoid the planning altogether because it's impossible. It's not credible that one of our canisters would ever fail. What hubris. And I would like to point out that there are many benefits to Holtec, Southern California, Edison, all of the other nuclear power generators, and the NRC for falsely claiming that the failure of a canister is a non-credible event. Forever, essentially, non-credible forever. Okay. Let me get back here. There's no need to manage the aging of canisters. You don't have to worry about how old they are, even though they're only licensed for 20 years. What's inside them is hot, nuclear hot for $250,000. There's no emergency planning required, would be no emergency planning required if
offsite emergency planning.
Okay. They can reduce the Price-Anderson offsite liability insurance requirements. There's no needed accident analysis, no inspection or repair requirements, no monitoring for loss of integrity. And we're talking about the canister, not the NRC here. There's no protection from floods, earthquakes, tsunamis, or terrorists. There's no need for a spent fuel pool. My gosh, throw them right in the canister. They're impossible to breach. There's no need for long-term spent fuel repository. Forget about Yucca Mountain. Who needs it when these canisters are indestructible forever? There's no need for 10 CFR 72.236, which I know the contents of. You do, Paul.
Yeah, it just is a requirement for redundant sealing of confinement systems that, again, the NRC has ignored because the loss of a single system is not credible.
But the NRC still needs to convince us that they are protecting the people and protecting the environment. I'm not at all convinced. It's more like they're protecting the U.S. nuclear industry. Okay. We maintain that there is a significant risk that cannot be ignored. Not credible is bullshit, excuse me.
I could postulate, we're gonna, release, radioactive material 50 miles out. I really don't know what the risk is. I know there is a risk of radioactive contamination, but it's never been analyzed that I am aware of.
I want to add that if this was asserted that it's not credible that one of these could ever fail, we would call, if it was asserted by a private corporation and it was part of its business model, we would call it a lie. But if it's asserted by the NRC, then it has to be regarded as malfeasance. A footnote: each of these canisters contains more radioactive cesium than was released at Chernobyl. Each one of those 73. And if you look around the country, there are over 3,000 of them.
Yeah, this is somewhat debatable. There's different information, but I can tell you it's close to the amount of radioactive material in each canister than was released at Chernobyl. So let's go on.
Okay. Risk assessment from canister failure, earthquake, tsunami, terrorism, etc., must recognize that most of the radiation potential is still in the spent fuel. Spent fuel is a misnomer. It's partially spent fuel. About 20% of the energy, 20-30% of the energy perhaps, is used in the boiling of water to make steam to generate power. The rest of it is still in those spent fuel rods. But it's cheaper to get new ones in there and bury the old ones in these indestructible canisters. Excuse me for the sarcasm I resort to.
Okay, the Holtec's final safety analysis reports admits that the canister must be kept full of helium gas. It means it's got to maintain its integrity to prevent spent nuclear fuel in canister from exceeding design limits. This is true for all Holtec canisters. When they're talking about design limits, there's no guarantee that if you lose integrity, that the fuel doesn't exceed its design limits, does not melt, does not do anything. Now, what we're seeing here is a Holtec canister in the manufacturing phase.
What?
And you can see
That's what's protecting us between nuclear safety and a Chernobyl-sized release of radiation.
That's it. That half or 5/8 of an inch, whatever it is, that's all that's between Chernobyl and the environment.
And it's welded shut, so it can never be examined on the inside for cracks, leaks, anything. Welded shut.
It's not even monitored for temperature, pressure, or radiation. Next slide.
So this insubstantial thin-walled canister is all that lies between the public and about 3,200 Chernobyl-sized radiation releases. But don't worry, failure is not credible according to Holtec and the NRC. And I'd like to point out a few other not credible events that Paul and I have looked up on the internet. The bridge that fell in the wind because it struck a resonant frequency, the San Bruno gas line explosion, all non-credible events, 3 Mile Island reactor core meltdown, the Hindenburger disaster, who would have believed? Not credible. Chernobyl itself and Fukushima, not credible. What, tsunamis? One of the many, many dam failures. And the David Bessie reactor vessel corrosion, which I'm not...
For those of you outside the nuclear business, this one on the right is Davis-Bessie reactor head corrosion. This is boric acid corrosion. This is the very reactor top, which is 6 inches thick of carbon steel. And over a 6-month or 12-month period, it corroded all the way through the 6 inches. The only thing that saved it from a major, major accident was 1/8 inch of stainless steel liner, which was not affected by the boric acid. another nuclear incredible or not credible event that's never been defined. Next, please.
Again, we think a better motto would be protecting the industry and not the public. We're offering the NRC all of this, these ideas free of charge. Now, this is one of those implementations close up.
Yeah, what you're seeing here is the circular thing in the top is the air outlet, and the air inlet is along the sides. But, you know, in a reasonable flood, these get flooded. And I'll be the first to admit, as long as they're flooded and remain flooded, the fuel is cooled. But once it boils off, you're SOL, ladies and gentlemen. You don't know what to do, and there are no provisions to correct from or to recover from this event.
And I will not ask you to define your acronym SOL.
Right, don't.
There's that diagram again, and again I'll say, where are the drains, guys? If a wave, a king tide wave, doesn't even have to be a tsunami. If a king tide wave comes across because of the 83% higher probability of extreme flooding events by 2030, there's no provision for water that would wash into these 73 canister emplacements for it to drain out the bottom.
Yeah, but in defense of the industry, if you had a drain, you'd have to drain it to the Pacific Ocean. And if the ocean came up, it would come, you know, up the drain and flood it that way. So, you know, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Introduction of moist air or salt has never been considered or analyzed.
As far as we know, if it has been, we haven't been shown where, or it's been redacted. I want to remind where we left off that only 1 out of 1,000 petitions have been gotten through to not really substantive relief in that 37-year period. And I want to compare that with industry performance by the NRC's own calculations. This table, it shows that over 800 licensing actions completed in 2016, 17, 18, and 19. And then there were an additional 600 some odd action. Paul, would you explain what that indicates?
Yeah, these numbers are actually worse than what they appear. You know, we said about maybe 1,000, 2.206 petitions, but if you add up the same time period at the same rate, this is 30,000 requests from the industry, and I have never seen one ever turned down, and I have personally participated and gotten approval when I was working for a utility on a phone call asking for a deviation from the regulations, and it was approved within 1 hour. And here we are with the NRC won't even define what they're talking about. So go ahead, Stuart.
I just want to say, and if you look at the caption, this was for a congressional budget justification. So the NRC brags about how many industry petitions and licensing actions they get through, but nowhere is there any mention of public input and how many of those they process, because they basically haven't processed any. They've turned most away unconsidered. But let's go on. I suggest that this is protecting the industry year after year is a better motto for the NRC. Again, back to how astoundingly raw a deal CFR 2.206 gives petition process gives the public. So requests for regulatory relief by utilities are rarely questioned or rejected.
Let me pick it up.
Please.
Yeah, from personal experience, requests are at times granted by a simple phone call on a Friday night saying, hey, we need to keep our diesel generators or our plant online even though we don't have enough diesel generators. Next line. Over my life, in the last 10 years, I have personally submitted 6 petitions. Next. 5 have been rejected by the PRB. Next. One petition was accepted by the PRB and denied by a formal director's decision. Wow, that's a win for me. Got all the way to the director. Next. One of my petitions was rejected by the PRB and investigated by the NRC's Inspector General's office. Next. In that case, they found the NRC misrepresented information to me and identified numerous process errors, so on and so forth. I've had many meetings with David Skeen and other people, and the process is still screwed up. And the Inspector General obviously is watching this one very carefully.
Would you say that a fair translation of the word misrepresented in ordinary terms is lied?
I'm just saying that's what the Inspector General characterized it as. Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
However, the NRC provides a great illusion of protecting the public. 10
Okay.
CFR.
These are words, these are quotes right out of the law, out of 10 CFR 2.206. It just basically says no one can appeal any decision we make. It's almost like regulatory infallibility that we've always heard similar terms being used. This is regulatory infallibility right here. Next.
Well, I'd like to know where regulatory indulgences are handed out. But excuse my...
To all the utilities.
Yeah. Okay, no possible public appeal whatsoever.
Self-explanatory.
In contrast, the industry can appeal any NRC regulatory decision, but infrequently needs to do that since most of them go in their favor, and they can appeal to any one of these 5. They can appeal let's just look at them. They can appeal to the NRC branch chief, the NRC division office, NRC office, the executive director of operations, or the NRC commission. And that's from attachment 5 to the NRC NEI meeting summary, November 17th, 1999.
And by the way, NEI is Nuclear Energy Institute, which is the lobbying organization for the entire nuclear industry. And they willingly exchange and have dialogues almost daily with their lobbyists. It says in there, long-term integrity of the fuel and cladding depends on storage in an inert atmosphere. Go ahead.
That's from page 944 of the FSAR. And note,
the need for an inert atmosphere is required for both storage and for transport forever. Again, part of the tech specs, it says you have to determine the quantity of helium and you have to have an action plan if the helium pressure or if the helium pressure is lost or increases or decreases, and that the actions, and again, this is a legal requirement, not some BS NRC document, that actions must be developed and implemented in a timely manner. Next slide.
Well, but if the canisters are leak-proof, then why bother? I think that's Holtec's attitude.
Yeah, that's right. So I filed a FOIA last week for a copy of the action plan. The NRC has a great way of hiding these documents so they don't have to be supplied by FOIA, but I want to see the action plan. Next.
So if one needed to refill it with helium to prevent further damage, one would have to do so in a spent fuel pool. That's the only way possible to open it up and pump in more helium. But decommissioned plants don't have spent fuel pools. They've been taken down as part of the decommissioning process. This is a huge unresolved problem, and the NRC refuses to address it. There is no possible recovery from the not credible need to refill canisters with pressurized helium. We regard the NRC's preliminary decision to reject the petition as irresponsible and wrong, and it places millions of people in Southern California at risk that is unquantifiable. Now, the rejection was made, Paul, would you pick this up?
Yeah. It says here, again, these are legal, this federal law, that it must be evaluated by appropriate tests or other means acceptable to the NRC to demonstrate. That hasn't been provided. Next, please.
That's federal law.
Go ahead. Yeah. Compliance must be demonstrated or everyone's breaking the law, but no one seems to care. Keep going. This is a response rejecting the acceptance where Tilda says has been previously analyzed or considered. Again, maybe it has, but they have not provided the information.
I want to, on Tilda's behalf, say that she was instructed to express this to us. This is not the first time. Time after time, NRC refuses to even consider petitions based upon the specious argument that the issues have been previously addressed, but they, in violation of the law, do not furnish any proof that they've been previously addressed, except perhaps to a document that has been redacted.
It says, has any Holtec-related non-credible event ever occurred or been reported to the NRC? Does the NRC want to answer that? Any response? Has a non-credible event ever occurred with a Holtec canister? I hear something.
Mr. Blanchard, we're here listening to you.
Oh, you're listening to me, but you decided you're not going to answer.
They've already told us they're not going to answer. They've been.
Yeah. What I'll do is this. I'm going to ask Mr. Scott Burnell, he's our public affairs officer, to give a couple minutes of his time. Scott, would you go ahead and speak up?
Thank you, Tilda. I believe they're very close to the end of their presentation. So if they can conclude, then we can go ahead and move on in the rest of the meeting.
Okay. Well, I asked the question. I'll give you the answer, not the total answer. But I can tell you that Holtec in the past has claimed an event couldn't happen and was non-credible. And that the NRC observed the event's occurrence. And the NRC was not pleased because Holtec said it was not a credible event. It occurred, and guess what? The NRC slapped them on the hand with a green finding, saying, you shouldn't do that anymore, guys. And I feel as though we just happened to have upon that. But it's just proof of the NRC not being open with the public. They know not credible is a meaningless term.
Let's continue, Paul.
Yeah, go ahead.
We're precipitously close to the end, okay? And Holtec is still at it. This was a letter that was sent to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission just a few weeks ago. And in it, they're asking to avoid the safety planning based upon the assertion that the leakage of fission products from a canister is not considered to be a credible event. So they want to forget about any emergency planning based on that specious assertion. Did I get it right, Paul?
You got it right. Continue. We're going to give you a nuclear.
Don't give me anything.
These are Holtec's words. There is no credible accident resulting in a radioactive release. That would make me comfortable if it were true. Next.
Once again, Holtec wants the NRC to eliminate off-site emergency planning based upon an assertion that failure of the canisters is not a credible event.
An undefined, not credible event. They got a text back that talks about helium, but they got no way of measuring it.
We believe that the NRC is in effect brought to you by the industry.
Oh, you forgot Pacific Gas and Electric.
Oh, it's there. Can't you see it?
Oh, okay. You got Southern Cal in there. But don't forget NEI, it's there in a prominent position.
Now, we'd like to switch. So at the end, we want to lighten up a little bit. And Paul and I decided that it was very, very appropriate to express our profound sorrow for the horror and suffering that it was experienced by the Japanese people on March 11th, 2011. And this is the 10th year anniversary of the Fukushima disaster, a tsunami, an incredible event, non-credible event, a sad remembrance of the lives lost and the spread of radioactive contamination all around the world.
Yes, hi. Oh, I didn't actually have a question. I had a comment. I'm Diane Turco. I'm Director of Cape Town Windows, and we've been watching the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Reactor for these years. And I want to let you know, Holtec came to Plymouth and told us that they had an impeccable safety record. At the same time, the NRC was issuing the report about the near miss at San Onofre, and also called that there was mismanagement, poor training, lack of oversight. It took a whistleblower to show this crime. But I want to let you know what's happening at Pilgrim. We asked, what happens if there's a problem with the Holtec canister? What are you going to do? And Holtec said they were going to do that Russian doll thing. They were going to have a larger concrete canister cask going over a canister cask. And I said, has that been approved by the NRC? And they said, no. And I said, and do you happen to have one of those larger canister casks on site? And they said, no. So right now we know there is no plan to protect the public in the event of a problem with the cask at Pilgrim. And that threatens all of our communities. What's the NRC going to do about that?
Okay, thank you for your comment, Diane. We have 6 other members of the public on the line who wishes to express comment and questions, so we will go to the next.
Hello,
State your name.
I'm Jacqueline Drexler. I live in Valley Cottage, New York, across the bay from Indian Point. Indian Point is possibly going to be decommissioned by Holtec. We have these same issues about casks and flooding and climate change that many other places have. And I personally have to say, having been involved for years of going to NRC hearings, that the process is totally unwieldy. It's not possible that you could have, say, 400 people in a room who want to make comments at a public hearing when we used to be allowed to gather in person, and then not ever answer anyone's question. You are to serve us. I live in New York, and there are 20 million people at risk. Forget about property damage. We are the highest taxed county and state, and with the highest property values. And the decommissioning of Indian Point with this terrible company, Holtec, that already has a string of criminal issues surrounding them to begin with, is going to be putting 20 million people at risk. And I understand this is happening all over the country. They build their own thin-walled casks. They're making their own profit at the expense of the public. But I understand this is about the process of how people actually try to work with you all. And you know what? It doesn't work. Mr. Blanche is 100% correct that all you have done is stonewall people on their questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Jacqueline. I had mentioned at the beginning of this meeting that this is a category 1 meeting. In that case, in that term, it's a meeting between NRC and an entity. And the entity in this case is Public Watchdog. We have something called category 3 public meeting. That is where we actually solicit public comments into the licensing process. This is an opportunity to have public members to observe our meeting and to ask policy or on the question related to 206 process. So it's not really about the technical merit of the questions. So I want to clarify that. Holly, can we have the next public member? Keep in mind, we have scheduled only 10 minutes for public comments. We have already exceeded our time here. So I asked members of the public to keep your questions succinct and brief if possible, so that we may allow all the members to ask a question or make comments. Holly, would you give me the next public member?
Okay, next speaking, Michael Ravenwood. You are now unmuted.
Thank you so much. I'm from Encinitas, California, nearby Songs. And, you know, I have one question about the process, since I am allowed to ask about the process itself. But I just want to make a little bit of comment, you know, that I find it exceedingly frustrating that, you know, that we are not able to get questions answered, nor is Public Watchdogs able to get their questions answered. It just seems the entire thing is kind of lip service that we're experiencing here. And it's intensely frustrating when so many millions of people's lives are at risk at this time. And I do intend definitely